there are three things we should all agree on. One, that the murder of the African-American man in America at the hands of police was a murder. It was brutal. It was unjust. It was terribly wrong, and that policeman should not only be fired but face the full brunt of the law based on the evidence. Two, that rioting, looting, mayhem and destruction never a good plan for anything. And three, that most of us agree with 1 and 2. And if we can't agree on all of those things, then we're in a whole lot of trouble. A black man was brutally murdered by a police officer who was accused of racism. And I guess the question is there any evidence for that accusation? Because that's what people are protesting, with or without evidence. Let's whip around the panel, and can we start with you, Warren? Is there a basis for this accusation?
Look, it is a serious accusation, and when you look at the video, at least you got to sit there and say it was a very cruel and brutal way for a man to die, or any person to die, and to me, it just added to a number of other issues that have been happening around the place. Look, I don't know if I don't know the mind of the person who did this. All I know is that it was a brutal murder, and that and this has sparked this riots across the United States.
I'd have to agree with what Warren said. I think sometimes, when the focus is based on somebody's race, it takes away from the actual individual themselves. It's again using identity politics as opposed to getting to the issue itself, which absolutely is about police brutality. But yeah, I guess we've yet to see the evidence that would suggest whether this was racially motivated or not. What obviously is evident is that this police officer did the wrong thing, and would hope that the law is enforced in full, and he receives what the punishment that fits the crime.
Certainly there appears to be two very distinct protests going on in America: a genuine protest against police brutality and racial tensions, and then there is the violent, looting, criminal aspect to you call them protests, but this is not part of a genuine protest, led by organisations like Antifa, who are always sitting there in the background attempting to turn any kind of civil unrest into a large event. So they moved straight from COVID-19 into this particular incident of police brutality. And they've been very successful in motivating large mobs of rioters, as we can see across not just America, but it's spreading into other countries.
We know that the police officer involved, in fact, I just found out from somebody tonight who was trying to persuade me that the I don't know what word to use other than murderous cop, and it should be an oxymoron, and unfortunately it's not, but she was trying to convince me he was a racist, and I'm just saying, well, I'm prepared to believe you, I just need some evidence for that. I happily admit he was brutal. I happily admit he's a criminal. I happily admit he needs to go to jail based on the evidence and the full force of the law. But to call him a racist and say this is proof that America's racist top to bottom, beginning to end, you at least need to show me some evidence that he was motivated by racism. And apparently he's been charged or had 17 complaints against him. And I said, well, that's great. I'm sure you've seen the evidence. Show it to me. And there was a list of complaints, 2 of them for which he was disciplined, 15 he wasn't, but none of them had any details. She told me without evidence that 60% of those complaints were against African Americans. And so I said, well, what that means is you've just proven evidence that he's a brutal cop who's not exclusively brutal to African Americans and dishes it out fairly evenly. Is this just a case of police brutality, or is it proof that America's racist top to bottom, beginning to end? James, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the police officer's motivation is up for debate at this point from what I've read, but it's very clear that the charge of murder seems to be well justified. The man was fully subdued. The police officer had his foot on the man's neck. Now, if you are going to kill a man for allegedly counterfeiting a $20 note, you're doing policing all wrong. The police officer only lifted his foot effectively so they could put the corpse on the stretcher. The real outrage here was not just the fact that a police officer murdered a man for allegedly counterfeiting a $20 bill, but that the police officer was allowed to walk around free for a number of days before he was arrested and charged. All the rest of the city was under lockdown so they wouldn't catch the flu.
You have to, first of all, prove that the police officer's actions were racist, and if they were, he of course has done absolutely terrible things. That does not follow that the entirety of American culture is racist. And then from there, it doesn't prove or follow that you should tear it down and burn it to the ground, which is what we're seeing protesters calling for. So there are three very distinct issues that are going on here. The first everyone agrees with, which is the guilt of the police, well, not guilt, but assumed guilt of the police officer and his actions. The other two about America's position and what to do about it are where a lot of the conflict is coming from and a lot of the division in this particular conversation.
I've been following the Twitter, I've been following the social media and you heard the brother of George Floyd come out and speak as well. This whole thing seems to be hijacked. That there seems to be a lot of people just waiting for something to happen. Now, this was a dreadful crime that I've seen. The more and more I've watched it, and I've watched it about 5 times, and the worse and worse I get. It's the thing. So it looks like they said, look, okay, you can be angry about what's happened. You can protest, and we live in a liberal democracy, a free society. People can peacefully protest as much as they like. But this thing where you just go out and just burn and loot and attack innocent people. I saw so many videos of people being bashed, retailers and shop owners and stuff like that. And also that the police officer who was shot in Oakland, an African-American police officer as well. And then today you're hearing reports of 4 police officers who were shot in St. Louis, Missouri. And so this is not the answer to what is happening. And you see these people who are well organised and seem to be just out there to cause problems. So you've got 2 protests. You've got this peaceful daytime type protest who are genuine in their approach to what happened, the brutality of what happened to the arrest. And then you see these nighttime and late afternoon protests, which just turn into riots.
This is absolutely, as you said, Warren, just spilled over completely from demanding justice to perverting justice in a horrific and just gross way. And it's really not doing the protesters any favors at all. If they've got a valid point to make, and they probably do, then that's been lost. It's been destroyed, and the people who've hijacked this all have really done nobody a service at all.
It's not enough to do nothing. It's time for us to do something.